the devil, and a whole host of demons, together with the human witches who were supposed to consort with them, were believed in by just about everybody in the first half of the 17th century and beyond. The witches were believed to associate with familiars, usually domestic animals, in whom the demons manifested themselves. The witches were usually women, and their familiars were often their cats. Everyone, Catholics, Presbyterians, Anglicans, and Puritans alike, believed in witches. And one man has become notorious in England for his persecution of them: Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General, born in East Anglia and active in East Anglia against witchcraft. Hopkins wrote an account of his investigations, which tells us something about his beliefs, motives, and methods. The justification for the witch hunts lay in the Bible. Hopkins was aided in his investigations by a team of helpers, foremost among them his assistant, John Stern. An anthropologist who studied witchcraft around the world, as well as in 17th century England, is Dr. Alan Macfarlane of Cambridge University.
Witchcraft beliefs are as old as history. There have been, at the heart of our civilization, problems about why pain and suffering occur. Ultimately, the problem is, why me? Why did my child die? Why did my animals die? Why has it happened? And these problems of why are not fully solved by any particular religious or other system. And they have led in many civilizations to a search for causes which often light not on far-off gods and demons, but on your neighbor. Because your neighbor, after all, is someone you can actually deal with. You can't do much to God or Satan, but if you discover that someone you actually know has brought about the evils that afflict you, you can then take counteractions of various kind. So throughout many cultures in the world, and throughout all of recorded history, there have been beliefs in evil people, sorcerers and witches, who try and do us harm.
It is generally thought that Hopkins was born around 1620, which means that he was in his mid-20s when his witch-finding career began in and around Manningtree in 1644. A brooding landscape that may have fostered an atmosphere of all-pervasive witchcraft. He was the son of John Hopkins, rector of Great Wenham in Suffolk, from a long line of schoolmasters and clergymen. His father was described as a godly, which means Puritan, minister.
There's no evidence that he was motivated by religious fanaticism. His co-worker, John Stern, did mention that there were biblical injunctions against witches, and insofar as he, like everyone else, believed that witches were sent by the devil and therefore to exterminate them was a sensible and Christian act, he was motivated by religious fanaticism, but no more than anyone else living in that society would have been. There's no evidence that when he started his witch-finding in Manningtree, he thought of himself as a particularly godly fanatic battling against these evil witches. And in his defense of himself, which he wrote at the time, he doesn't lay much stress on the godly role he's performing. The stories which Hopkins gathered and the depositions which were given are very strange. The accounts, particularly of the witches' familiars, Vinegar Tom and Sack and Sugar and all the other strange named familiars, are very strange indeed. And one interpretation could be that they are all a figment of Hopkins' imagination, having stayed up too late at night and read too many books on continental demonology. That again would be an easy way out, because what is one of the most strange features of the witchcraft confessions throughout Europe, and particularly in England, is that sometimes the witches actually confessed to offences which we now know to have been impossible and to meetings which we now know couldn't have taken place. And it wasn't really until the 20th century, with the development of psychology, when people actually came forward and confessed impossible things such as this, that we began to see that it isn't merely a matter of suggestion by someone from outside, but people do actually fantasize and invent things which they really believe to be true.
Godly Puritan Essex seems to have entertained deeply held beliefs as to the reality of witchcraft. Witches, usually women, frequently old women with their familiars close by them, were believed to be scheming everywhere. Some of those witchcraft beliefs have persisted to very recent times in parts of Essex. An alleged witch was living in Canewdon, for example, into this century. And a local Canewdon legend has it that every time a stone falls from the church tower, it means that one witch has died and another has taken her place. And stones do sometimes still fall. In the 17th century, witches could be blamed for almost everything that went wrong. They could, for instance, cause storms at sea. One male witch, according to Hopkins, who was the vicar of Brandeston in Suffolk, told him that he had sent one of his imps to sink a brand new ship in the middle of a flotilla off Landguard Fort, opposite Felixstowe, with the loss of 14 lives. The witch told Hopkins that he was joyful to see what power his imps had, and that he was glad that he'd made 14 women widows within the space of a quarter of an hour. In July 1645, Hopkins was able to deliver over 30 witches for trial at the Essex Assizes. 19 were condemned to be hanged, and 4 died languishing in the dungeons of Colchester Castle by the visitation of God, as it was said, meaning jail fever. Hopkins's methods of investigation included the search for marks of the devil on his victims' bodies, and the test by swimming. If the accused floated, she was a witch. If she sank and possibly drowned, she was innocent. Framlingham Castle, with its moat, ideal for swimming witches, was the site of the trial of the Vicar of Brandeston. He was searched for devil's marks, probably pimples, kept awake for nights on end, and swum in the moat. He floated, establishing his guilt beyond doubt. In 14 months of witch hunting, Hopkins came to be known in East Anglia as the Hangman of Manningtree. He probably brought about the deaths of some 100 people.
One of the most worrying but curious features of the Hopkins witch trials is the way in which everything he did was perfectly legal. He was sustained, in fact, by the lawyers and the justices and the assize judges. As he himself pointed out, all the methods he used in examining the accused were allowed of by the judges and the justices. He worked within the system. He didn't break the rules, and when later on the rules were changed slightly so that he couldn't use some of his methods, he was immediately obeyed this and changed his own methods. So he was sustained by the legal system, and he was clearly also sustained by the wishes of the majority of the population. This isn't a matter of a single man deciding to persecute unfortunate minorities. It's a case of the majority of the population being quite happy to see someone doing a useful duty like getting rid of evil people. And there are plenty of analogies nowadays in which one can see governments deploying people to get rid of other people they consider to be evil. And there is nothing difficult to understand about it. Therefore, he was, in a sense, swimming with the wave. The wave was moving in that direction, and it wasn't at all difficult to sustain this for a couple of years. There were dozens of people who wanted to accuse their neighbours, and there were a number of neighbours who wanted to either be cleared of witchcraft or to face the penalty.
A grim instance of the dire consequences of witchcraft beliefs came up in Norwich. A baker felt himself under such a cloud of suspicion that he willingly submitted to trial. He was found guilty of being a witch and hanged. Witchcraft beliefs and accusations of the 17th century could take some far-fetched turns. At Great Shelford in Cambridgeshire, a witch was accused of having got his breeches caught on the weathercock of the church whilst flying over the steeple on the back of a black hog. But rational voices were being raised against Hopkins by the autumn of 1645. The Reverend John Gore at Great Staunton in Huntingdonshire, a Puritan himself, preached against the witch hunts in the following summer. Every old woman, he said, with a wrinkled face, a hairy lip, a squint eye, having a ragged coat on her back, and a dog or cat by her side, is not only suspected, but pronounced for a witch. Soon there were insinuations that Hopkins was only in it for the money, and even that he was himself a witch. He retired from witch-finding and died at Manningtree after a long sickness of consumption. He was buried at Mistley on August the 12th, 1647, on the eve of the last struggles of the Civil War that had made his witch hunts possible.